A small, glittering stone sits inside a velvet box, carrying the immense weight of human expectation. For generations, the diamond engagement ring has stood as the ultimate, unquestionable symbol of eternal love and commitment. Buyers willingly part with months of salary to secure this crystallized carbon, believing they are purchasing something exceedingly rare and intrinsically valuable. Yet, this emotional and financial transaction is not the result of natural scarcity or ancient tradition. It is the crowning achievement of one of the most successful, century-long corporate strategies ever executed. Uncovering the truth behind this glittering facade reveals a masterclass in market manipulation. The perceived value of these stones is a meticulously constructed illusion engineered to turn an increasingly common mineral into the ultimate luxury good. The forces that shape this reality did not emerge from romance, but from a calculated defense against financial ruin. Before the late 19th century, diamonds genuinely were rare. They were found primarily in the riverbeds of India and the jungles of Brazil, yielding only a few pounds of stones each year globally. This extreme, natural scarcity dictated their astronomical price, restricting ownership strictly to royalty and the ultra-wealthy. But in 1867, a massive geological shift occurred when teenage boys discovered a 21.25-carat diamond on the banks of the Orange River in South Africa. Soon after, an enormous network of diamond-bearing volcanic pipes was unearthed nearby. This was not a minor deposit. It was a massive, unprecedented geological bounty that threatened to flood the global market with millions of carats. The sheer volume of stones buried in the African dirt possessed the power to destroy the very industry it created. This sudden abundance created an existential crisis for the gemstone's value. In classical economics, when the supply of a commodity drastically increases without a corresponding surge in demand, the market price collapses. Financiers in London and investors across Europe realized a terrifying truth. If these South African mines operated freely, competing against one another to extract and sell as many stones as possible, diamonds would soon become little more than semi-precious trinkets. The intrinsic value of the stone was practically zero. Its entire economic worth rested entirely on the perception of rarity. To protect the vast capital flowing into the new mining operations, a radical intervention was required. The impending oversupply had to be choked off at the source. Enter an ambitious British businessman named Cecil Rhodes. Arriving at the South African diamond fields in 1871, he did not focus purely on digging for stones in the crowded, chaotic pits. Instead, he recognized that true wealth lay in controlling the infrastructure and the land itself. Renting water pumps to miners during a severe flood, he systematically began buying up the claims of smaller operators who could no longer afford to dig. Backed by extensive financing from the Rothschild family, he aggressively consolidated these fragmented mining operations into a single, unified entity. By 1888, his relentless acquisitions culminated in the creation of De Beers Consolidated Mines. This single corporate maneuver laid the groundwork for an empire that would dictate global trade for the next century. The formation of this singular enterprise fundamentally rewrote the rules of the global jewelry trade. Within a few short years, this newly minted corporation controlled an estimated 90% of the world's rough diamond production. By owning the physical source of the commodity, the company could dictate exactly how many stones entered the market at any given time. They established a central selling organization in London, a tightly guarded syndicate that invited only a select group of buyers to purchase rough stones. These buyers were offered a specific box of diamonds at a non-negotiable price. If a buyer refused their allotted box or attempted to negotiate, they were permanently exiled from the syndicate. There was no alternative supplier to turn to. This ruthless distribution model effectively birthed a global diamond cartel. Through this centralized pipeline, the syndicate perfectly matched the release of rough stones to the fluctuating demands of the global market. When economies boomed and demand rose, they released slightly more inventory, but never enough to satiate the market completely. When economies contracted, they stockpiled the stones in massive London vaults, entirely removing them from circulation. This system of artificial scarcity ensured that the wholesale price of the commodity remained perfectly stable, entirely detached from the actual massive volume of stones being pulled from the earth. The corporation effectively severed the normal economic relationship between supply and demand. For the everyday consumer standing at a retail jewelry counter, this back-end market engineering was entirely invisible. They saw only the high retail prices and assumed they reflected the stone's natural, geological rarity. The cartel's tight grip on supply successfully protected the financial investments of the mining conglomerates, but it relied on a very fragile assumption. It assumed that the public would continue to desire these stones regardless of broader economic conditions. The true test of this artificial market structure would soon arrive, threatening to shatter the illusion of intrinsic value and expose the vulnerability of a single commodity monopoly. The Great Depression delivered a devastating blow to the luxury goods sector worldwide. As global wealth evaporated in the 1930s, the demand for non-essential items plummeted dramatically. The price of rough stones began to slide as the syndicate's stockpiles grew to unmanageable levels. Even with absolute control over the supply chain, the cartel faced a terrifying reality. If the public simply stopped wanting diamonds, no amount of vault space in London could prop up the market indefinitely. The company needed a way to manufacture desire just as effectively as it had manufactured scarcity. The survival of the empire depended on a radical shift in consumer psychology. To solve this demand crisis, the company's leadership turned to the United States, which represented the largest untapped consumer market on the globe. In 1938, they hired the prominent New York advertising agency N.W. Ayer. The agency was tasked with an unprecedented and highly complex challenge. They did not need to promote a specific brand, a particular jewelry store, or even a specific cut of stone. Instead, they needed to fundamentally alter the American public's psychological relationship with a commodity. The objective was to convince young men that the size and quality of a diamond were directly proportional to the depth of their love, and to convince young women that an engagement was fundamentally incomplete without this specific stone. The resulting public relations campaign was a masterpiece of psychological engineering. The agency covertly placed diamonds on the fingers of Hollywood starlets, embedded the stones into the plot lines of major motion pictures, and fed stories to society columns about the lavish rings exchanged by the elite. They subtly introduced the concept that a man should spend 1 to 2 months of his salary on the purchase. This was not an economic rule based on the stone's actual value, but an arbitrary, fabricated metric designed to maximize consumer spending. The campaign seamlessly wove a luxury product into the very fabric of social expectation, transforming a corporate asset into a cultural necessity. In 1947, a young copywriter named Francis Garrity penned a 4-word slogan that would permanently cement this strategy: "A diamond is forever." This phrase was revolutionary because it accomplished 2 critical economic goals simultaneously. First, it perfectly equated the physical durability of crystallized carbon with the eternal nature of romance. Second, and more importantly for the cartel, it strongly discouraged the resale of the stones. If a diamond represented eternal love, selling it was an unthinkable betrayal. By effectively preventing consumers from reselling their jewelry, the company ensured that millions of carats already in the public's hands would never re-enter the market to compete with new supply. The public became the ultimate unpaid custodians of the cartel's inventory. The success of this dual strategy triggered an explosive expansion of the global market. In the United States, the percentage of brides receiving a diamond engagement ring skyrocketed from a minority in the 1930s to nearly 80% by the end of the 20th century. But the syndicate did not stop at the American border. In the late 1960s, they deployed the exact same psychological playbook in Japan. Before the campaign, less than 5% of Japanese women received a diamond engagement ring, as the tradition had absolutely no historical precedent in the culture. Within 14 years, that number surged to 60%, making Japan the second largest market for the stones in the world. The formula was universally applicable. Despite this total dominance over global demand, the earth itself began to challenge the monopoly's grip on supply. In the latter half of the 20th century, massive new deposits were discovered far outside the company's traditional strongholds. Enormous mines opened in the frozen tundra of Siberia, the remote deserts of Australia, and eventually the subarctic regions of Canada. These new discoveries represented a terrifying threat to the established order. If these independent producers bypassed the London syndicate and flooded the market with their massive yields, the carefully maintained illusion of scarcity would instantly evaporate. The corporation had to act swiftly to contain the geographical sprawl of the commodity. To neutralize this geographical threat, the cartel deployed its vast financial reserves to absorb the new production. When the Soviet Union began extracting millions of carats from the Mir mine, The syndicate simply bought the entire output in secret, preventing a single Russian stone from hitting the open market independently. When a massive Australian mine began producing millions of smaller, lower-quality stones, the cartel absorbed them and simultaneously launched a new marketing campaign to create consumer demand for eternity rings, which utilized these exact smaller stones. They continuously adapted their demand generation to perfectly match whatever supply the Earth forced upon them, maintaining the delicate balance of their global ecosystem. However, the sheer scale of this market manipulation eventually drew the intense scrutiny of international regulators. In the United States, antitrust laws strictly prohibit the kind of price fixing and supply control that define the syndicate's operations. For decades, the corporation could not directly operate within American borders without facing immediate prosecution. The Justice Department repeatedly indicted the company for its anti-competitive practices. While the cartel managed its global empire from London and Johannesburg, the legal pressure from the world's largest consumer market slowly began to crack the foundation of their absolute control. The legal walls were closing in on the century-old syndicate. By the dawn of the 21st century, the structural integrity of the monopoly finally began to fracture. Independent mining conglomerates in Canada and Australia, emboldened by shifting geopolitical landscapes and frustrated by the syndicate's strict quotas, decided to bypass the central selling organization completely. They began selling their stones directly to the global market. The sheer volume of this independent production became impossible for one single entity to absorb financially. The era of absolute supply control was ending, forcing the legacy corporation to transition from a market dictator to a competitive luxury brand. The iron grip on the world's rough stones had definitively slipped. Simultaneously, a profound technological disruption emerged from the laboratory, threatening the very definition of the commodity. Scientists perfected the ability to replicate the extreme heat and pressure of the Earth's mantle, creating lab-grown diamonds that are chemically, physically, and optically identical to mined stones. This innovation struck at the very heart of the historical business model. By manufacturing the commodity on demand in weeks rather than millennia, technology entirely decoupled the gemstone from the concept of natural rarity. The market was suddenly flooded with flawless stones, offered at a fraction of the cost of their mined counterparts, fundamentally altering the economics of the entire jewelry trade. Today, the modern consumer navigates a vastly different landscape than previous generations. The emotional resonance of the engagement ring remains deeply embedded in cultural expectations, but the financial mechanics underneath have shifted dramatically. Buyers now weigh the romantic appeal of a mined stone against the ethical and economic advantages of a lab-grown alternative. The echoes of that century-long marketing triumph still resonate in every jewelry store, but the absolute authority that once dictated the price tag has dissolved. The illusion of extreme rarity has been permanently pierced by transparency, legal challenges, and relentless technological progress. The legacy of this extraordinary enterprise serves as a definitive case study in the power of corporate strategy. It demonstrates how a single entity, armed with immense capital and brilliant psychological insight, can effectively engineer reality for an entire global market. They did not just sell a commodity. They sold an idea, inextricably linking their product to the most fundamental of human emotions. The history of the diamond trade is not a story of natural geology, but a masterclass in how economic forces, monopolistic control, and manufactured desire can shape the fortunes of nations and the intimate lives of millions.